Clara Dawson had always been the kind of woman people admired from a distance. At 28, she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence, her sharp brown eyes reflecting both intelligence and warmth. She lived in a modest, yet tastefully, decorated apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a place that, despite its cramped corners, felt like home because she had poured her soul into every detail. From the vintage bookshelves lining the living room walls to the potted ferns hanging by the windows, everything spoke of Clara's personality: thoughtful, creative, and resilient. By day, Clara worked as an editor at a small publishing house, where her meticulous eye for detail earned her praise from colleagues and authors alike. But it was her life outside of work that painted the picture of perfection, or so it seemed. Clara was married to Daniel Carter, a rising star in the world of corporate law, whose polished suits and charming demeanor made him the envy of many. Together, they appeared to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a relationship that radiated stability. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. It wasn't just the financial strain, though. That was certainly part of it. Clara had shouldered most of their expenses during Daniel's early years as a lawyer, when his salary barely covered rent. Now that he was earning more, she expected them to share responsibilities equally. Instead, Daniel insisted on maintaining a lifestyle far beyond their means: lavish dinners, expensive vacations, designer clothes, all while dismissing her concerns about saving for the future. But money was only one piece of the puzzle. Lately, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was missing between them. Conversations felt hollow, arguments unresolved. Every time she brought up her dissatisfaction, Daniel would retreat into silence or brush her off with vague promises to do better. It left her wondering if he truly valued her, or if she had simply become another item on his checklist of achievements. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Clara decided to surprise Daniel by leaving work early. She walked briskly through the autumn chill, her scarf pulled tight against the wind, imagining how nice it would be to spend some quality time together. When she arrived home, however, the apartment was empty. Frowning, she dropped her bag on the counter and noticed faint voices drifting from the balcony. Curious, Clara stepped closer, her heart quickening as she recognized Daniel's voice. He was talking on the phone, his tone casual but edged with disdain. "She's just a body to me," he said, laughing lightly. "Honestly, I don't think she even realizes how little I care." Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her hands gripped the doorframe tightly as she strained to hear more. On the other end of the line, his friend Ryan chuckled in agreement, though their exact words were muffled by the sound of passing traffic below. For a moment, Clara stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing. Was this some cruel joke? A slip of the tongue? Or had Daniel meant every word? When Daniel finally hung up and turned around, he nearly jumped at the sight of her standing there, pale and trembling. "Clara," he exclaimed, clearly startled. "You're home early." She forced herself to speak, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "What did you mean just now?" Daniel hesitated, then shrugged dismissively. "Oh, come on. Don't take it so seriously. You know how Ryan is. He exaggerates everything. I was just blowing off steam." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to stress or a bad day. But deep down, doubt began to creep in, planting seeds of uncertainty that would soon grow into something much larger. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Daniel snored softly beside her, Clara realized she didn't recognize the man lying next to her anymore. And perhaps, she thought with a pang of unease, she never really had. The days that followed Daniel's careless remark were a blur of tension and unanswered questions. Clara tried to act normal, going about her routine with practiced precision, brewing, coffee in the mornings, proofreading manuscripts at her desk, even forcing polite conversation over dinner. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was a whirlpool of suspicion and unease. Every glance Daniel gave her felt calculated, every word he spoke laced with hidden meaning. Her curiosity soon turned into determination. If Daniel thought he could dismiss her feelings so easily, then she would find out exactly what he was hiding. It started small, a quick scroll through his phone while he showered, a peek at his laptop when he stepped out for groceries. At first, Clara told herself it was harmless, just a way to ease her worries. But the more she looked, the more unsettling patterns began to emerge. One evening, as Daniel attended yet another work dinner, Clara sat cross-legged on the couch with his laptop open in front of her. She clicked through emails, receipts, and bank statements, piecing together fragments of a life she didn't recognize. There were charges from high-end restaurants she'd never visited, tickets to events she hadn't been invited to, and transfers to accounts she couldn't identify. Most damning of all were the text messages between Daniel and Ryan, cryptic exchanges filled with coded language about someone named S. "Who is S?" Clara whispered aloud, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her heart raced as possibilities swirled in her mind. Could S be a colleague? A client? Or worse, someone closer to home? The uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her restless and irritable. Desperate for clarity, Clara reached out to her best friend, Mia. They met at their usual cafe, a cozy spot, tucked away on a quiet street where they often shared secrets over steaming cups of chai tea. "I think Daniel's cheating on me," Clara blurted before the drinks had even arrived. Mia raised an eyebrow, setting down her menu. "What makes you say that?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She trusted Mia implicitly, but admitting she'd been snooping felt like crossing a line. Finally, she settled on a partial truth. "He's been distant lately, spending less time at home and more with Ryan. And there are these discrepancies in our finances. Plus, I overheard him say something a few weeks ago. It sounded like he doesn't care about me anymore." Mia frowned, leaning forward. "That's serious, Clara. But before you jump to conclusions, maybe you should talk to him directly. Confrontation might not be fun, but it'll give you answers faster than guessing games." Clara nodded absently, though deep down, she knew confrontation wouldn't solve anything. Daniel was too smooth, too skilled at deflecting blame. He'd twist her words, turn the tables, make her feel like the unreasonable one. No, if she wanted the truth, she'd have to dig deeper and do it alone. Over the next few days, Clara became a shadow version of herself. She stopped trying to mend things with Daniel and instead focused on gathering evidence. She installed a budgeting app to track their joint account, took screenshots of suspicious transactions, and even followed Daniel one night after he claimed he was working late. It was during this stakeout that Clara discovered something alarming. From across the street, she watched as Daniel exited a sleek office building, not his firm's headquarters, and climbed into a taxi with a woman whose face she couldn't quite see. The sight sent a jolt of panic through her chest. Was this S? Had Daniel been lying to her all along? Back at home, Clara poured herself a glass of wine and stared blankly at the wall. For months, she'd clung to the hope that their problems were temporary, fixable. Now, faced with mounting proof of betrayal, she realized how naive she'd been. But anger wasn't the only emotion bubbling inside her. Beneath the hurt and humiliation lay a flicker of defiance. If Daniel thought she was just a body to him, then he had underestimated her completely, and Clara intended to prove him wrong. Clara's investigation reached its breaking point on a cold, rainy Thursday evening. She had spent the week oscillating between rage and despair, her emotions fueled by fragments of evidence that painted an increasingly damning picture of Daniel's double life. Yet nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. That night, Daniel announced he was meeting Ryan at a bar downtown, a rare admission, considering how evasive he'd been lately. Clara seized the opportunity. Under the guise of running errands, she grabbed her coat and headed out, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The bar was dimly lit, its atmosphere thick with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Clara spotted Daniel immediately, seated at a corner table with Ryan. She hesitated for a moment, then slipped into a booth nearby, partially obscured by a potted plant. From her vantage point, she could hear their voices clearly, though they spoke in hushed tones. "You've got to stop dragging this out," Ryan said, swirling the ice in his glass. "She's bound to figure it out sooner or later." Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Let her try. Clara's too busy playing the victim to see the bigger picture. Besides, she doesn't suspect S is involved. Not yet, anyway, at Aume." The mention of S, Clara's stomach churned. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the booth as she strained to listen further. Ryan chuckled darkly. "Still can't believe you pulled it off. Marrying someone like her just for status? That takes guts, or desperation." "Desperation," Daniel corrected, his tone casual but tinged with bitterness. "I needed stability, connections, a way to climb the ladder faster. And let's be honest, Clara was easy to manipulate. She thinks love conquers all or some nonsense like that." Clara felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Each word hit her like a physical blow, stripping away any lingering illusions about the man she had married. "She's smart, though," Ryan added thoughtfully. "Smart enough to notice when things don't add up. What happens when she finds out about the accounts?" Daniel waved a hand dismissively. "By then it won't matter. I've already moved most of the assets. If she pushes back, I'll make sure she looks like the unstable one. People will take my side. They always do." Clara's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them away, forcing herself to stay focused. She couldn't afford to break down now. Not here, not in front of him. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Clara quietly rose from her seat and slipped out of the bar, her mind racing. The rain outside had intensified, drenching her within seconds, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the depth of Daniel's betrayal. Not just the lies, but the calculated manipulation, the years wasted building a life with someone who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. Back at the apartment, Clara moved methodically, her earlier vulnerability replaced by steely resolve. She retrieved a box from the closet and began packing her essentials: clothes, toiletries, a few cherished books. As she worked, her thoughts turned to revenge. If Daniel wanted to play games, fine. But this time, she would set the rules. The Bao. Next morning, Clara called in sick to work and spent hours poring over the documents she'd collected. She cross-referenced bank statements, highlighted suspicious transactions, and drafted a timeline of Daniel's deceit. By the time she finished, she had constructed a dossier so damning that even Daniel wouldn't be able to wriggle free. But Clara wasn't done yet. Her search led her to discover something new: a series of emails between Daniel and Sophie, her own cousin. The messages revealed not only their romantic involvement, but also a chilling level of coordination. Together, they had planned every detail of Daniel's financial maneuvers, ensuring Clara remained oblivious until it was too late. Sophie. Of all people, Sophie. Clara stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Sophie had been her confidant, the person she turned to whenever life felt overwhelming. Now, it seemed, Sophie had been using their bond to sabotage her from within. Betrayal upon betrayal. It was almost too much to bear. Yet amidst the pain, a spark of clarity emerged. Clara realized that leaving Daniel wasn't enough. She needed to dismantle the web of lies he and Sophie had woven, and she knew exactly where to start. With newfound purpose, Clara opened her laptop and began typing. This time, she wasn't writing someone else's story. She was crafting her own. The days following Clara's discovery of Sophie's betrayal were a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger, grief, and disbelief swirled inside her like a storm she couldn't contain. Yet beneath the chaos, a quiet resolve began to take root. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly awake, as if the scales had fallen from her eyes, revealing not only the truth about Daniel and Sophie, but also the person she had become while tethered to their lies. It was during one of these restless nights that Clara found herself wandering into a small cafe near her office. She hadn't planned to stop. It just happened, as if fate, or perhaps sheer exhaustion, had nudged her through the door. The space was warm and inviting, with mismatched furniture and shelves lined with second-hand books. A chalkboard sign near the counter read, "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone." Clara ordered a cup of tea and settled into a corner table, her gaze drifting toward the counter where a man with paint-streaked hands was arranging pastries. He introduced himself as Noah, the cafe's owner and part-time artist. There was something disarmingly genuine about him. The way he smiled without pretense, the sincerity in his voice when he asked how her day was going. They struck up a conversation, which eventually turned into regular meetings. Over steaming cups of coffee or slices of lemon cake, Noah shared stories about his own struggles, how he'd left a corporate job to pursue art, only to face rejection after rejection before finding success on his terms. His words resonated deeply with Clara, who had spent so much of her life trying to meet others' expectations instead of her own. "You deserve more than survival," Noah told her one afternoon, his tone soft but firm. "You deserve joy, passion, something that makes you feel alive." His advice planted a seed in Clara's mind. For years, she had shelved her dream of writing fiction, dismissing it as impractical compared to the stability of editing. But now, with her old life crumbling around her, she realized there was no better time to start anew. Inspired, Clara enrolled in a creative writing course at a local community center. At first, sitting among strangers who seemed far braver than she felt, she doubted whether she belonged. But as weeks passed, something remarkable happened. Her words began to flow freely, unburdened by fear or self-criticism. She wrote about betrayal, resilience, and the quiet strength it took to rebuild oneself. Her classmates praised her work, calling it raw and powerful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to believe in her potential. Meanwhile, her relationship with Daniel grew colder, almost transactional. They barely spoke except to argue over finances or logistics, each interaction reinforcing the distance between them. Clara no longer cared about salvaging anything. They were strangers sharing the same roof, nothing more. One evening, as she sat at her desk drafting a short story, Daniel walked in holding an envelope. His expression was unreadable, his movements deliberate. "This came for you today," he said, placing the envelope on the table before retreating to the living room. Inside was a letter from Sophie. Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper, bracing herself for another blow. But what she read wasn't an apology. It was a confession. Sophie admitted everything: the affair, the financial schemes, the calculated manipulation. She claimed she had acted out of jealousy, believing Daniel could give her the life Clara appeared to have effortlessly. "I never meant to hurt you," Sophie wrote, "but I can't undo what I've done. Please forgive me, even if I don't deserve it." Clara stared at the words, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to confront Sophie face to face. But another part, a stronger, wiser part, knew that forgiveness wasn't about absolving Sophie. It was about freeing herself from the weight of bitterness. She set the letter aside and returned to her writing, channeling her pain into creativity. By the time dawn broke, she had completed a draft of a story about a woman betrayed by those closest to her. But unlike Clara, this character chose vengeance, unraveling lives piece by piece until nothing remained. As she reread the final lines, Clara realized she didn't want that ending for herself. Revenge might bring fleeting satisfaction, but it wouldn't heal her wounds. What she needed was closure, and the courage to step into a future untethered from the past. With newfound clarity, Clara closed her laptop and made a decision. It was time to leave Daniel behind, not for revenge, but for redemption. The day Clara decided to confront Daniel was gray and overcast, the kind of weather that mirrored the weight in her chest. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, rehearsing what she would say, steeling herself against the possibility of his manipulation. Yet as she stood in the kitchen, watching him sip his morning coffee with an air of oblivious calm, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could she really go through with it? But then she remembered Sophie's letter. The financial records. The countless nights she had lain awake replaying his betrayal in her mind. This wasn't just about ending their marriage. It was about reclaiming her dignity. "Daniel," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "We need to talk." He looked up from his newspaper, eyebrows raised. "About what?" Clara placed a thick folder on the table between them. Inside were copies of bank statements, emails, text messages, everything she had uncovered during her investigation. "This," she said simply. Daniel's expression shifted from curiosity to unease as he flipped through the documents. His jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, Clara thought he might deny everything. But then he sighed, leaning back in his chair with a resigned shrug. "I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out," he admitted, his tone almost casual. Clara stared at him, stunned by his lack of remorse. "How could you do this? To me? To us?" "To be honest, Clara, there never was an us," Daniel replied, his voice cold and clinical. "You were convenient, a way to secure my future. But let's not pretend you didn't benefit too. I gave you stability, a nice apartment, a life most people would envy." Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "And what about love? Respect? Did those mean nothing to you?" Daniel chuckled bitterly. "Love is overrated. It's money and power that keep people together, not fairy tales." His words hit her like a slap, but they also confirmed what she had suspected all along. Daniel had never truly cared for her. He saw relationships as transactions, emotions as liabilities. "There's something else you should know," Daniel added after a pause, his lips curling into a smug smile. "Sophie isn't just some random woman. She's been helping me plan this for months. In fact, once we finalize the divorce, I'll be transferring most of our assets to her." Clara's stomach churned. She had suspected Sophie's involvement, but hearing it confirmed aloud was devastating. Still, she refused to let Daniel see her pain. Instead, she leaned forward, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "You underestimate me," she said quietly. "Do you really think I'd come here without a backup plan?" Reaching into her bag, Clara pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. On it was every piece of evidence she had collected, not just against Daniel, but against Sophie as well. Emails detailing their schemes, screenshots of incriminating conversations, even recordings of their phone calls. "If you try to pull any of this," she continued, gesturing toward the folder and the USB drive, "I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Your firm, your friends, your family. They'll all find out how far you're willing to go for greed." For the first time since the conversation began, Daniel's confidence wavered. His eyes darted between the folder and the USB drive. His mind racing. "You wouldn't dare," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," Clara shot back, her tone icy. "Unlike you, I have nothing left to lose." Silence hung heavy in the air as Daniel processed her words. Finally, he stood, grabbing his coat and heading for the door without another word. As it clicked shut behind him, Clara sank into a chair, exhaling deeply. She had expected anger, guilt, maybe even tears, but instead she felt relief. The confrontation hadn't been cathartic, but it had served its purpose. She had stripped Daniel of his power, exposing the truth for what it was. Later that evening, Clara received a text from Mia, who had noticed her absence from work. "Are you okay?" Clara stared at the screen for a moment before typing her response. "I'm more than okay. I'm free." As she set her phone down, her thoughts turned to Sophie. Though she still grappled with the betrayal, Clara knew confronting her cousin directly wouldn't change anything. Some wounds ran too deep to mend, and forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. Instead, Clara focused on the future. She booked an appointment with a real estate agent to sell the apartment. It was time to start fresh, somewhere new. She drafted a resignation letter to her job, planning to dedicate herself fully to writing. And late at night, when the world felt quiet and vast, she wrote letters she would never send. To Daniel, to Sophie, to the version of herself who had stayed silent for too long. Each word was a step toward healing, a reminder that while she couldn't undo the past, she could shape the days ahead. And for the first time in years, Clara believed she deserved happiness, not because someone else deemed it so, but because she chose it for herself. Months passed, and Clara's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The apartment was sold, its memories boxed up and stored away like relics of a life she no longer recognized. With the proceeds, she purchased a small but charming studio on the outskirts of Brooklyn, a place where sunlight poured through oversized windows, and the scent of fresh paint mingled with the promise of new beginnings. For the first time in years, Clara felt untethered from the expectations that had once defined her. She traded tailored blazers for cozy sweaters, rigid schedules for creative freedom. Her mornings began with coffee brewed slowly on the stovetop, her afternoons spent hunched over a desk cluttered with notebooks and pens. Writing became her sanctuary, a space where she could explore not only her pain, but also her resilience. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. One day, while scrolling through social media, Mia sent her a link to an online essay contest hosted by a prominent literary magazine. On a whim, Clara submitted a piece inspired by her experiences, a raw, unflinching account of betrayal, self-discovery, and redemption, titled "The Woman Who Walked Away." Weeks later, she received an email informing her that her essay had won first prize. It wasn't just the accolade that thrilled her. It was the flood of messages from readers who saw themselves in her story. Women reached out to share their own tales of heartbreak and healing, thanking Clara for giving voice to emotions they had long suppressed. Encouraged by the response, Clara decided to expand her essay into a full-length memoir. The process was grueling at times, forcing her to revisit wounds she thought had healed. But with each chapter, she grew stronger, more assured of her worth. When the book finally hit shelves, it quickly climbed bestseller lists, earning rave reviews for its honesty and depth. Through it all, Noah remained a steady presence in her life. Their friendship blossomed naturally, built on shared laughter and quiet understanding. Unlike Daniel, Noah didn't try to fix her or mold her into someone else. He simply listened, offering support without judgment. One crisp autumn evening, as they strolled along the waterfront, Noah turned to her with a soft smile. "You've come so far, Clara. I'm proud of you." Clara glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing words couldn't fully capture how much his kindness meant to her. Their relationship evolved slowly, deliberately, free from the urgency and toxicity that had marked her marriage to Daniel. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to trust again, not because she needed validation, but because she wanted connection. As winter settled over the city, Clara found herself reflecting on how far she'd come. Gone was the woman who had doubted her worth, who had stayed silent in the face of betrayal. In her place stood someone braver, wiser, a woman who understood that happiness wasn't something to be earned or granted. It was something to be claimed. One afternoon, As she sorted through mail piled on her kitchen counter, Clara noticed an envelope bearing Daniel's handwriting. Her stomach tightened as she opened it, half expecting another attempt at manipulation. But inside was a single sheet of paper, scrawled with messy, hurried lines. "Clara, I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I want you to know that losing you has been the greatest regret of my life. You were right. I underestimated you. And now, I see what I threw away. I hope you find everything you're looking for. Daniel." Clara read the letter twice, her fingers tracing the ink, as if searching for hidden meaning. Then, without hesitation, she walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched as the flames consumed the paper. She didn't feel anger or triumph, only peace. Whatever Daniel had lost, whatever Sophie had sacrificed, it no longer mattered. Their choices had shaped her journey, yes, but they no longer controlled her destination. That night, Clara sat at her desk, penning the opening lines of her next novel. It was a story about second chances, about finding light in unexpected places. As she wrote, she realized it wasn't just fiction. It was her truth. And for the first time in years, Clara smiled, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be.